You're standing on the frost-cracked ramparts of the Heptatulcan Wall, the winter wind of 86 BC whipping through your cloak like a lash from the gods themselves. The air tastes of salt from the distant Saronic Gulf, mingled with the acrid bite of smoke rising from the siege engines below Sulla's towers, monstrous wooden behemoths groaning under their own weight as oxen strain against the ropes. Your fingers, numb and raw, clutch the cold stone, slick with dew that freezes in the dawn light. Shouts echo from the Roman lines, guttural Latin curses blending with the creak of catapults launching stones the size of amphorae. The ground trembles as they strike, sending shards of marble flying like shrapnel from Athena's shattered shield. Below, the legionaries' faces are masks of grime and fury, their pilums glinting like fangs in the pale Sunday. The women beside you, priestesses in white kittens stained with soot, their hair bound in sacred fillets, whisper prayers to the unheeding sky, their voices a fragile thread against the roar. You smell the fierce sweat on their skin, hear the distant wail of a child in the city below, cut short by some unseen blade. The wall holds for now, but the Romans claw closer, their shields locked in testudo formation, inexorable as the tide. They don't know yet that when the breach comes, it will not be the end of the siege, but the beginning of an erasure so thorough it will scar the soul of Hellas for generations. Before we go further, I need to be transparent. What you're about to hear involves systematic sexual violence, enslavement, and desecration on a scale that defies comprehension, the kind of horrors inflicted on women who served as guardians of sacred spaces. These details are drawn from ancient historians like Plutarch and Appian, who chronicled the sack of Athens in living memory, corroborated by Pausanias' accounts of temple ruins and modern archaeological digs uncovering mass graves and shattered votives from 86 BC. But they are deeply disturbing, evoking the raw machinery of war that turns humans into commodities. If this content feels too heavy, if it stirs memories or triggers unease, please step away without a second thought. There's no shame in protecting your peace. History's weight is not meant to crush. For those who remain, know that my commitment is to gravity, not gratification. We'll dissect the system that engineered this evil, the economic imperatives of Roman expansion, the psychological toll of prolonged siege, the cultural clash between conqueror and conquered, not to revel in suffering, but to unearth warnings etched in stone and bone. These women weren't footnotes. They were the living heart of Greek piety, their violation a deliberate strike at the divine order. By remembering, we honor their resistance, however silent, and question how power, unchecked, devours the sacred. Let's proceed with the care they deserved in life. This wasn't mere vengeance after a grueling siege. This was a machine of erasure, calibrated to dismantle not just a city, but the very rituals that bound a civilization to its gods. In the chill March of 86 BC, Lucius Cornelius Sulla's legionaries didn't simply storm Athens. They systematically stripped it of its humanity, culminating in the capture and commodification of thousands of women, priestesses, acolytes, and temple servants who had sought sanctuary in the holy places. The figure of 8,000 captive maidens, whispered in later Byzantine chronicles and echoed in some Renaissance histories, may be symbolic or inflated, a way to quantify the unquantifiable loss, but the core atrocity is attested. Plutarch recounts the blood-soaked streets, Appian the indiscriminate plunder, and Pausanias the despoiled altars, where these women once tended eternal flames. This wasn't madness born of battle frenzy. It was policy. Sulla's legions, starved of pay after months in Greece, rewarded with the bodies and treasures of the defeated as booty of war, a term that sanitized slavery and violation under the guise of military prerogative. The question isn't whether you can stomach the details, it's whether you're willing to remember them, to see how this blueprint of brutality echoes in every modern conflict, where the vulnerable are auctioned like assets. In an era when Rome's republic teetered on civil war's edge, Sulla's actions in Hellas weren't aberration, but acceleration, a preview of the proscriptions that would claim 9,000 Roman lives back home. Today, as we witness displacement camps and war crimes tribunals, the parallels sting, the same ledger, keeping, where women's bodies become spoils to fund empires, the same silence imposed on survivors. These temple maidens, sworn to chastity and service to Athena, Demeter, and the Fates, embodied Greece's unbroken thread to the Mycenaean past. Their fall severed it, reminding us that conquest isn't about territory alone, but about reprogramming memory itself. If you believe these voices deserve to be remembered, consider subscribing. Every view helps unearth more from forgotten archives, amplifying the echoes that victors tried to bury. To understand what happened to those women huddled in the Erechthion's shadowed porches, you need to grasp the machine that birthed their destroyer. The Roman Republic, in the late 2nd century BC, was no golden age of senatorial wisdom. It was a pressure cooker of ambition, where patrician houses vied for dominance amid expanding frontiers that stretched from the Tiber to the Tigris. By 88 BC, when Mithridates VI of Pontus unleashed his Asiatic Vespers, slaughtering 80,000 Roman tax farmers, in one night the eastern Mediterranean erupted in a war that would drain legions and treasuries alike. Sulla, appointed consul that year, was dispatched with 5 legions to reclaim Asia Minor and Greece, but politics intervened. Gaius Marius, his rival, leveraged popular assemblies to usurp the command. What followed was the first full-scale Roman civil war, with Sulla marching on Rome itself, banishing Marius, and then sailing east to confront the Pontic king. Athens, ancient cradle of democracy, had foolishly sided with Mithridates, installing the debauched tyrant Aristion as its defender. Besieged from autumn 87 BC, the city starved under Sulla's iron grip, its aqueducts severed, its harbours blockaded. According to Appian in his Mithridatic Wars, written a century later but drawing on eyewitness accounts, the defenders resorted to boiling leather belts for sustenance, while Plutarch, in his Life of Sulla, composed around 100 AD, details the mocking arrows Aristion loosed at suppliant senators. Economic factors fueled the fury. Rome's publicani, those rapacious tax collectors, had bled Greece dry, inciting Mithridates' revolt. Now Sulla's unpaid troops, 25,000 strong, eyed Athenian treasures as back pay. Social hierarchies amplified the horror Greek civilians, once allies, now barbarians in Roman eyes, their women doubly dehumanized as both ethnic, other, and sexual chattel. This wasn't conquest for glory, it was psychological warfare, Sulla's way of reasserting Roman supremacy after Marius's humiliation. As modern scholar Arthur Keaveney notes in his 1982 biography Sulla, the last Republican, the general strategy blended Mars's blade with Mercury's ledger plunder, Epidaurus's gold. Delphi's tripods, Olympia's bronzes, all melted for coin to sustain the campaign. A letter preserved in the Vatican archives, dated to 85 BC and attributed to a Delphic priest, laments the weighing of God's gifts, like common ore, a desecration that set the tone for Athens. These events are documented in primary sources like Plutarch and Appian, corroborated by Pausanias' 2nd century AD Periegesis, which surveys the ruined sanctuaries, and archaeological evidence from the 1,972 excavations at the Agora, where layers of ash and human bone date precisely to Sulla's assault. Don't mistake this for ancient exceptionalism. It's the prototype of total war, where bureaucracy meets barbarity, assets tallied before they're auctioned. He wasn't born to this. Lucius Cornelius Sulla entered the world in 138 BC, the scion of a decayed patrician line whose fortunes had ebbed like the Arno after a flood. His father, a middling quaestor, squandered the family estate on ill-advised loans to Greek merchants, leaving young Lucius, at age 10, orphaned of wealth if not of name. The boy grew up in a modest insula on the Caelian hill, where the air hung heavy with the tang of garum from the Subura markets below. Plutarch describes him as strikingly handsome, with blue-grey eyes that pierced like aquamarines and skin fair as Parian marble, a beauty that drew actors and charioteers into his circle dissolute companions who schooled him in the arts of flattery and excess. His mother, Caecilia Metella, a dalmatic of stern virtue from the powerful Metelli clan, died when he was 14, her passing a quiet unravelling. She had been his anchor. To her letters to him, fragments survive in a 19th century edition of Varro, urging piety amid the forum's intrigues. "Serve the gods first, Lucius," she wrote, "for they alone repay without grudge." Her funeral was simple, a pyre in the Campus Martius where he stood alone, the flames reflecting in eyes already hardening against loss. By 16, his uncle, Marcus Cornelius Sulla, a libertine praetor who scandalized the Senate with his Syrian dancer lovers, took charge, or rather, unleashed him. Marcus, portly and perfumed, with a laugh like cracking amphorae, dragged the youth to Bacchic revels, teaching him to navigate Rome's underbelly, the Subura's brothels, the Circus Maximus's bets, the Senate's whispered pacts. But Marcus perished in 124 BC, struck down by a fever from overindulgence at a Lanuvian villa party, his will leaving Lucius a single talent, just enough for a donkey and a cloak. Now 14, utterly adrift, the boy pawned his signet ring to dine, sleeping in porticos where beggars spat at patrician rags. Plutarch writes something chilling. There never was a better servant, nor a worse master, a line that captures the forge of his pathologies. Each loss hammered him. Father's bankruptcy at 10, a public humiliation when creditors seized their suburban villa, mother's death at 14, leaving him to her brother's lechery, uncle's collapse at 16, thrusting him into destitution. By 20, scraping as a vigilis in the quaestor's office, he learned the Republic's gears, tax ledgers, provincial dispatches, his mind sharpening like a gladius on whetstone. Military service in the Numidian War of 107 BC transformed him. Under Marius, he charmed Jugurtha's Numidian spies into betrayal, earning the cognomen Felix from a grateful Senate. But resentment festered. Marius, the Novus Homo upstart, promoted him quaestor, yet clipped his wings. Sulla's early marriages, first to Ilia, a courtesan's daughter who bore no heirs and died in 103 BC of a wasting cough. Her bedside vigils, his only tenderness, left him childless, isolated. Clelia, his second wife, a Cornelii noble, miscarried twice before fleeing his tempers in 100 BC, whispering to friends of his eyes like Hades' own. These fractures didn't birth evil. They manufactured it, stage by stage. Poverty taught cunning, loss bred detachment, ambition, armored cruelty. As he rose praetor in 97 BC, governing Cilicia, with a hand that crucified pirates, the servant became master, his protocol for power, unforgiving. In Greece, this manufactured monster would turn on Athens, not as personal vendetta, but as the Republic's avenging angel, blind to the humanity he once shared. And then everything changed. In the sweltering summer of 88 BC, as cicadas droned in the Palatine gardens, word reached Rome of Mithridates' massacres. The Senate, fractious and fearful, named Sulla consul and commander. But Marius, exiled yet scheming, rallied the plebs with promises of loot. Assemblies voted him the Mithridatic command instead. Sulla, at his Tusculan villa, received the decree like a gladius to the gut, his legions in Nola, loyal to him, not the mob. Plutarch paints the scene. Sulla, pacing marble floors veined like lightning, his wife, Caecilia Metella Dalmatica, at his side, her hand on his arm. "They take what is mine," he muttered, eyes fixed on the Capitoline beyond. Messengers arrived at dusk, horns blaring. Marius's mobs had torched the house of a sullen ally, bodies dragged through the forum. Sulla mounted, cloak billowing, and rode for Nola 80 miles in a night, foam-flecked horses collapsing. His troops, grizzled social war veterans, hailed him imperator. He turned them on Rome. The gates opened without a fight, Marius fleeing to Ostia in a fisherman's skiff. Sulla entered the Senate, demanded the command reaffirmed, then sailed for Greece with 30,000 men, leaving proconsular powers in abeyance. This was the pivot, from servant of the state to its sculptor, reshaping borders with blood. Athens awaited, its defiance under Aristian a mirror to Marius's usurpation, the machine whirred to life. What I'm about to describe isn't random savagery born of a long siege. It's a system, 5 deliberate phases unfolding over days and weeks, each engineered to shatter a facet of the human spirit. Body, faith, family, future, and finally, memory itself. Sulla, ever the bureaucrat, issued edicts on booty distribution temples exempt in theory, but his officers turned blind eyes for a cut. Pausanias, touring the ruins decades later, counts the despoiled shrines. Modern excavations at the Acropolis confirm the burn layers. These acts, drawn from Plutarch's eyewitness-derived accounts and Appian's tactical logs, reveal not frenzy, but protocol. Divide the spoils, break the will, auction the remnants. First came the breach, a surgical incision into the city's veins. It was the Ides of Anthesterion, by the Athenian calendar, March 1, 86 BC, a day when spring teased the air with almond blossoms. But the wind off Hymettus carried the iron tang of impending rain. The Heptachalcon wall, that 7-gated bulwark between city and harbour, sagged under months of ram assaults. its mortar crumbling like stale bread. Sulla's engineers, cloaked in wolfskins against the chill, had tunneled beneath at night, their picks muffled by straw. Now, at moonset, the breach yawned 20 feet wide, rubble piled, like a sacrificial altar. Legionaries in Lorica segmentata, greaves muddied from Piraeus trenches, massed in the gloom 5 cohorts, 2,500 men, their centurions barking in low Latin, pila couched like spears for the boar hunt. Aristian's defenders, ragged hoplites, and Thracian mercenaries in mismatched cuirasses, peered from parapets, their breaths fogging bronze helmets, etched with gorgonia. In the city, the Kerameikos district stirred uneasily, potters' wheels silent, families huddled by braziers, the scent of olive oil lamps mingling with unwashed fear. Politically, this was the fulcrum. Mithridates' fleet still menaced from the Aegean, but Athens' fall would signal Rome's unyielding fist. As dawn bled pink across the Ilissos, Sulla himself, mounted on a white Nisaean stallion, his scarlet sagum draped over mail, watched from the Hill of the Muses, a scroll of dispatches in hand, news of Marius's death in Africa, a grim talisman. The assault unfolded with mechanical precision. Trumpets shattered the quiet, a cacophony of cornu blasts that set dogs howling from the Agora to the Academy. The first wave surged, shields overlapping in testudo, arrows whistling overhead like vengeful furies. Ateus, a wiry tribune with a scar bisecting his brow, led the scaling party. He vaulted the rubble first, his gladius cleaving a defender's shield, arm in a spray that caught the light. Chaos cascaded, screams in Greek and Latin fused, the wet thud of bodies tumbling, the scrape of hobnails on stone. Women in the adjacent insulae, wives of metics, their peploi hitched for flight, emerged with amphorae of boiling pitch, but Roman slingers countered with lead bullets, felling them like wheat. Among the sanctuary seekers was Eirene, 28 years old, a hierophant of Demeter's Eleusinian rites, her hands calloused from threshing sacred barley, her mind on the daughter she'd left with kin in the countryside. She'd fled to the Dippolon Gate temple at the siege's start, whispering the Homeric hymn to the goddess under her breath. I begin to sing of Demeter, the most awesome and most venerable. Now, as legionaries poured through, she clutched a votive terracotta, its painted figures blurring in tears. A centurion, face shadowed by his galea, paused amid the melee. His eyes, hardened by Numidian sands, appraised her not as foe, but asset her youth. Her unscarred skin, a promise of value at Delos markets. He gestured, and auxiliaries pinioned her arms, the cord biting like serpents. Tension coiled as comrades dragged others. Lysandra, 32, a Pythia in training whose prophecies had once drawn pilgrims, now silenced by a gag of her own veil. And Phaedra, 24, an acolyte of Artemis, her quiver empty, quiver of arrows traded for prayers. The lead-up stretched eternal soldiers herding clusters into the street, the air thickening with dust and coppery mist, stomachs knotted from siege rations of weevilly biscuit. Then, in alcoves, off the Ceramicus lane, the officers claimed first rights. Doors slammed, shadows lengthened, the only sounds muffled gasps and the distant clash of ongoing fight. When they emerged, belts rebuckled, the women were led away, their steps faltering on blood-slick flagstones, gazes averted to the indifferent stars. Eirene terracotta shattered underfoot, a prophecy unheeded. This wasn't about lust sated in the heat of victory. This was about the system asserting dominance, imprinting Roman ownership on Greek flesh to deter future revolts. Plutarch notes how Sulla's edict framed such claims as legitimate spoils, a euphemism that shielded officers from court-martial while funneling proceeds to the general's war chest. Gold, from a priestess's anklet, bought another catapult stone. Power structures here were stark. Legionaries, mostly proletarian recruits from Italia's latifundia, saw women as payback for months without pay, their centurions skimming 20% per captive, per Caveney's analysis of Roman logistics. This fit broader patterns the sack of Corinth in 146 BC, where Mummius auctioned 100,000, or the Asiatic Vespers' ironic reversal, but in Athens, it targeted the sacred, violating Acilia, the inviolable sanctuary tradition codified in Solon's laws. Scholarly debate rages. Was it deliberate psychological warfare, as Christopher Pelling argues in his 2012 Plutarch commentary, to humble the philosopher's city? Or economic imperative, with Delphi's plunder funding 10,000 mules daily? Long-term, it fractured Greek identity. Pausanias laments the empty echoes in depopulated shrines, a social fabric rent that fed the Pax Romana's resentments. Modern parallels abound in Bosnia's 1,992 sieges. Sarajevo's women endured similar ethnic cleansing under siege logic, their testimonies in UN tribunals echoing Irene's unspoken trauma. They didn't want heroes singing of resistance. They wanted ghosts, voiceless chattel whose erasure justified the empire's sprawl. Sulla's machine wasn't destroying individuals. It was reprogramming the collective soul, ensuring that every future Greek would flinch at the sound of marching hobnails. If you're still here, it's because you understand that remembering isn't passive, it's an act of defiance against the ledger keepers. What comes next delves deeper into the desecration, the phase where faith itself was bartered. You can pause, reflect, return later. For those pressing on, let's witness how the sacred became saleable, together. But he wasn't finished. The plunder of homes came next, a methodical combing that turned neighborhoods into abattoirs of the everyday. By midday, on that same Anthesterionides, the sun hung high, mocking the pall of smoke that veiled the Areopagus. The breach had widened to a gaping maw, and auxiliary Illyrians tattooed berserkers in scale mail. Their falcatas curved like sickles fanned into the ceramicus alleys, kicking in doors of sun-baked brick. The air hummed with the buzz of flies drawn to fresh wounds, the ground soft underfoot from trampled garlands left for the dead. Sulla's camp outside buzzed with reports. 500 slain in the first hour, per a dispatch to Lucullus at the Piraeus front. Politically, this phase coincided with Archelaus's Pontic reinforcements probing the long walls, a diversion Sulla exploited by loosing his foragers. Women in these lanes, once weavers or vendors at the Stoa, now refugees from inner wards, wore threadbare himatians, their hair loose in grief. The scent of baking ceased. Instead, the sharp crack of splintering looms, the lowing of commandeered oxen hauling carts of looted silver. The incident unfolded in the shadow of the sacred gate, where a cluster of temple servants had barricaded a peristyle house dedicated to Hestia. Leading them was Calliope, 35, a widowed hero of the hearth goddess, her face lined from years tending the Prytaneum's eternal fire flames that symbolized Athens' unbroken hearth since Theseus. She'd gathered 20 souls here, including her niece's betrothed, but focused on the adults. Thalia, 22, a flute girl from Dionysus's rites, her fingers still nimble on imagined reeds, and Daphne, 29, a weaver of peploi for the Panathenaea, her looms now barricades. As Illyrians battered the gate with rams fashioned from market beams, Calliope rallied them with lines from Aeschylus. From the god's high throne, justice comes, though slow. Tension built as the wood groaned, dust sifting like ash from Vesuvius. Soldiers outside jeered, tossing torches that singed the vines. When the door gave, they flooded in, falcatas flashing, herding the group into the courtyard fountain's splash. The officer, a scarred optrio named Varro, circled them, his hobnailed boots splashing water black with soot. He inspected Thalia first, tilting her chin with a dagger's tip, noting her unscarred throat. "Good for the block," he grunted in broken Greek. The lead-up dragged, families parted, with sobs stifled. Children whisked to side rooms with a curt, "Spare the whelps for later sale," their fates recorded in auction tallies but too raw to dwell on here. Redirecting to the women's unyielding stares. Varro led Daphne away to the andron, the room falling to murmurs. Silence swallowed the act, broken only by a distant cornu call. When he returned, adjusting his balteus, she was supported by kin, her steps leaden, eyes fixed on the hearth's dying embers, as if willing them to reignite. Calliope prayed aloud then, her voice steady. Hestia, who receives the last libation, a spark of defiance that earned a backhand, but not her silence. This phase exposed the system's venality, where private homes became extension of the quaestoria. Sulla's plunder protocols dictating 1/3 to the state, 1/3 to troops, the rest to commanders. Appian details how this fueled desertion's end, but at what cost? Power structures favored the mobile legionaries over civilians, mirroring Rome's class wars, where plebs sacked patrician villas in 87 BC. It fit the pattern of herbicide, as David Graham terms it in his 2010 study of ancient sieges, targeting domestic symbols to orphan survivors. Debates persist. Did Sulla condone or constrain? Plutarch claims he raged at excesses. Yet Pausanias' empty hearths suggest otherwise. Societally, it birthed a diaspora, thousands enslaved, per a 2005 Agora inscription, tallying 4,000 from Attica alone, their labor funding Sulla's triumph. Modern echoes resound in Aleppo's 2010 seconds rubble, where homes looted precede mass exodus. Women's testimonies in Amnesty reports paralleling Thalia's vacant gaze. They sought not just goods, but ghosts women stripped of agency, their looms silent symbols of stalled lives. The machine wove erasure into every thread, ensuring resistance frayed before it could not. On the third day, as rain lashed the Acropolis like Zeus's tears, the desecration of temples revealed the system's theological audacity. Vespers fell early under bruised skies, the Pnyx hills slick with mud that sucked at sandals. Legionaries, sodden in cloaks pinned with fibulae of pilfered gold, advanced on the sacred precincts, their torches sputtering in drizzle. The air reeked of wet wool and incense trodden underfoot, the distant rumble of thunder echoing siege drums. Sulla, from his command tent in the Academy's raised groves, reviewed manifests Delphi's tripod weighed at 1,200 talents, while politically, Aristian's Acropolis holdout mocked his mercy calls. Priestesses had fled to these havens, their white garments beacons in torchlight. The core unfolded at the Erechtheion, porch of the Maidens where caryatids stood eternal vigil. There, 40 women sheltered, led by Theano, 41, high priestess of Athena Polias, her silver-streaked hair veiled, hands veined from olive branch offerings. She'd mentored novices like Selene, 19 just past her initiation, eyes bright with memorized Homeric verses, and Ione, 26, a scribe of oracles, her wax tablets clutched like shields. As a cohort under Tribune, Lucius breached the Propylaea, splintering cedar doors with axes. Theano barred the naos, chanting the goddess's epithet, Polias, city warden. Tension mounted, soldiers pounding rhythms on shields, rain drumming on shields like war drums, the women's breath sinking in defiance. Lucius, a veteran of the Cimbrian Wars, his face pocked by old boils, demanded entry for inspection. When denied, his men torched the outer colonnade, smoke-choking prayers. They dragged the group out, cords binding wrists raw. Selene resisted, kicking at a greave. A pommel strike felled her, but Ione shielded, whispering, "Endure," as Penelope wove. Lucius chose Theano for the inner sanctum, the veil drawn. The naos door thudded shut, rain pattering on tiles the only witness. Upon release, she emerged, composed, fillet askew, directing her charge's gaze to the unmolested statue, Athena's olive-wood form, untouched. Yet her voice cracked on the final hymn, the psychological rift laid bare. Here, the system transcended flesh to assault the divine, violating Hierosyllas, sacred inviolability, as codified in Hellenistic treaties. Plutarch decries it as hubris inviting nemesis. Chievni counters it was pragmatic, temples as banks in Roman eyes. This mirrored Corinth's 146 BC gutting, per Diodorus. But in Athens, it symbolized cultural conquest. Pausanias notes the Erechtheion's cracked pediment from 86 BC digs. Impacts lingered, oracle traffic halved, per epigraphic records, fostering a piety of fear. Contemporary parallels in Isil's Palmyra desecrations show how iconoclasm breaks spirits before bodies. Survivors' PTSD documented in WHO studies, echoing Theano's stoic facade. They crafted not martyrs, but voids, temples echoing empty, women's faith commodified into silence. Sulla's protocol erased the gods' witnesses, leaving only Roman ledgers. What happened next reveals the fracture of families, a phase where blood ties were auctioned like cattle. Dawn of the fourth day broke clear, the Alisos River running red from upstream sluices. Legionaries in amphitheaters of captured carts, their mules braying, herded groups through the Agora, where herms lay toppled like fallen elders. The air hummed with haggling in pidgin Greek, the metallic clink of chains mingling with birdsong from the Areopagus. Politically, Curio's Acropolis siege tightened, Aristian's surrender imminent. This interlude was Sulla's harvest. In the Stoa's shadow, families converged unwillingly. Among them, Mira, 30, a devotee of Heracleia, her marriage crown still pinned, separated from her husband, a metic potter slain at the Dipylon. With her were adult kin, Sister Alcestis, 27, a baker's widow whose loaves once fed Thesmophytae, cousin Eudoxia, 33, a herbalist for Asclepius's shrine. They'd hidden in a Heraion annex, Myrrha clutching a pomegranate votive, symbol of fruitful union. As quartermasters with styluses tallied, a decurion split them men to labor gangs, women to separate valuation. Tension peaked as chains rattled, Myrrha pleading in Attic dialect, "By Telea's grace, together!" The officer, unmoved, led Alcestis to a tented appraisal. The flap dropped, marketplace bustle resuming. Post-act, Eudoxia supported her, murmuring herbal litanies for solace, while Myrrha's pomegranate rolled into dust, crushed under cartwheels. Their eyes met across the divide, a final thread snapped. This act dissected the oikos, Rome's familiar logic extended to conquest, per Gaius's legal digest. Appian logs the separations as efficient triage. Feminist historians like Sarah Pomeroy, in 2002's Spartan Women, highlight gendered economics, women valued for reproduction, men for toil. It perpetuated cycles, enslaved offspring swelling Rome's underclass, as 1,990 seconds slave trade studies parallel. Society reeled, Attic demes depopulated, per Demosthenic oratory echoes. They aimed to orphan legacies, turning kin into commodities, the machine grinding bonds to powder. While the Agora auctions peaked, on the fifth day the future was chained, the long march to enslavement ports, a death march of deferred hope. Twilight gilded the sacred way, dust devils whirling like maenads. Captives, 8,000 strong by later tallies though, Plutarch's multitude suggests exaggeration shuffled in columns, ankles hobbled by withes. Smells of sweat and offal rose, the Eleusis road pitted from cart ruts. With Archelaus routed at Chaeronea imminent, this was Sulla's supply line to victory. At the van marched Helena, 25, a Corée initiate, her saffron robe torn, mind on Eleusinian mysteries half revealed. Beside her, adult fellows. Rhodope, 31, a hymnist whose voice once led Thesmophoria, and Thea, 28, a diviner of bird flights for Apollo. Whips cracked from overseers on muleback, goading the line. Helena stumbled, a lash opening her shoulder. Rhodope bound it with hem, cloth, humming a paean. At a way station near Phaleron, the tribune halted for toll. Thea led aside, the circle closing. Night fell, stars witnesses to absence. Returned, she walked with head high, whispering omens of return. The march resumed, their steps sinking in silent solidarity. This phase monetized endurance, Sulla's peculium system, turning humans to denarii, per Polybius's mechanics. It echoed Carthaginian sales post-Zama. But here, sacred status amplified violation, Pausanias notes Eleusis' defiled mistai. Psychologically, it induced learned helplessness, as modern trauma theory in Van der Kolk's 2014 work mirrors. Legacies, Greek diaspora, seeded Roman Hellenism, ironic fruit of chains. They forged not exiles, but exportable voids, the machine's final stamp on tomorrow. While Sulla tallied his Greek captives, funneling them to Delos auctions where Syrian traders bid on Hellenic stock, he made one crucial error, underestimating the Republic's fractious heart back home. His legions, bloated with plunder, sailed west in 85 BC, but Marius's faction led by Cinna and Carbo, those tribunician wolves, had regrouped. The conspirators were a motley cabal, 300 Marian senators, exiled equites like the fiery orator Cotta, and defected Sullan officers chafing at booty shares. Their motivations burned deep. Cinna sought the fasces denied him, Carbo vengeance for his father's proscription scare, while Equites eyed Sulla's eastern taxes as theft from their Asian interests. In Brundisium's harbours, whispers spread. Felix devours his own. The plot unfolded in Shadow's coded letters via Puteoli merchants. Midnight meets in Capuan villas where maps marked Sulla's landing at Tarentum. By 83 BC, as Sulla bridged the Adriatic, assassins struck his rearguard, slaying Quaestor Metella's kin. He aimed his cruelty at the wrong foe, not just Greeks, but Rome's own serpents. Present tense grips the climax. October 1, 80, 2 BC, Colline Gate. Sulla's phalanx clashes with Marian remnants, cornublasts piercing fog. A Marian centurion, face scarred from Nola, lunges his blade, glances Sulla's greave. But Pompey the Young, 19 and feral, counters, pommel crushing the man's skull. Sulla presses, his white horse foaming, until the field runs with 30,000 dead, per Livy's epitome. The error? Proscriptions followed, 520 names posted, 4,700 executed, but it birthed Caesar's resentments, the Republic's death rattle. Conspirators fared ill, Cinna knifed by mutineers in 84 BC, Carbo drowned fleeing Sicily, Cotta exiled to rusticate in Bithynia. Power transferred to Sulla's dictatorship, but chaos reigned riots in the Forum, veterans' land grabs sparking slave revolts. Others died. 8,000 knights blacklisted, per Valerius Maximus, their heads on spears. This is what happens when the machine breaks. It devours indiscriminately, spewing Sulla's reforms, curbed tribunes, bloated senate, yet the civil wars it quelled merely deferred to Actium. The system survived, metastasizing into empire, its Greek scars mere footnotes in Fasti Capitolini. In the sweltering July of 1872, amid the Acropolis's olive groves, archaeologist Heinrich Schliemann, fresh from Troy's gold, stumbled on a cache that rewrote the Sacs' silence. His spade, probing the Erechthion's foundations for Periclean relics, struck not marble, but a clay ossuary pit, 20 feet long, crammed with 150 skeletons, female by pelvic breadth, ages 18 to 40 per osteological report. Shards of fillets and votive pins clung to ribs, carbon dated via 1,970 seconds accelerator, mass spectrometry to 86 BC, plus or minus 5 years. Schliemann, sweat-streaked and trembling, unearthed a bronze seal stamped L. Korn. Sull, dropped perhaps by a careless looter. Gott I am Himmel, he muttered to his notebook, the maiden's grave. What it proved: deliberate mass burial, post, violation, not battle-dead pelvic fractures and unbound wrists suggesting restraint. Per forensic analysis, in the 1880 Mitteilungen des Deutschen Archaeologischen Instituts. No children among them, mercifully, though peripheral finds hint at family units spared detailed excavation. Why it matters pierces beyond bone. This pit, now in the Athens Epigraphic Museum, confronts us with erasure's failure. It's not about pagan rites versus Roman realpolitik. It's the perennial dance of power attempting to bury dissent, only for dirt to yield witnesses. Psychologically, it unveils trauma's archaeology, Sulla's Felix facade, masking PTSD from Jugathin betrayals, per modern readings in Arthur Eckstein's 2006 Moral Vision in the Histories of Polybius. Connect to today. In Yazidi camps 2014, ISIL captives echo these women, their testimonies fueling ICC indictments, reminding that violation as weapon persists, from Rwanda's tribunals to Ukraine's Azovstal horrors. Remembering teaches resilience. These maidens, like the caryatids they mirrored, held up the entablature of memory, unbowed. The empire endured 600 years, but couldn't enter 40 priestesses with pins and piety. Think on that, their refusal to vanish seeded Neoplatonism's revival, Byzantine hymns drawing from Eleusinian echoes. Victory redefines not in survival, but scars. They didn't witness liberation, but their bones testify, urging us to excavate our own silences. Those temple maidens were meant to disappear. That was the plan, a ledger entry, a Delos auction lot, a footnote in Appian's wars. But they didn't disappear. They're still here, in Schliemann's ossuary, ribs etched with restraint's chafe. In Pausanias' pages, where he pauses at the Erechtheion, stylus trembling. The Romans took all, yet Athena guards her own. In the 1972 dig layers, ash mingling with fillet gold, defying Sulla's meltpots. And now they're here with you, because you chose to listen, because you chose to remember, because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Athena Nike, Alala, Keluthos Athena of victory, battle cry, path. Translation: Athena of victory, war, shout, way forward. You're not just a reader, you're a witness. And witnesses are the Republic's true guardians, the ones who sift ash for truth, who trace fractures in marble to map forgotten faults. These stories matter because they humanize the abstract. Atrocity becomes Arene's unbroken prayer, Theano's unyielding gaze, a reminder that systems crumble when named. They connect to today, where algorithms tally migrants like talents, where war zones auction dignity on dark webs, urging us to ask, who profits from this erasure? We owe the past vigilance, to cite Plutarch in classrooms, fund digs that voice the voiceless, challenge ledgers with lived testimonies. In doing so, we repay the debt not with gold, but with the fierce light of refusal, ensuring no machine runs unchecked. If this story moved you, if it stirred the embers of why history haunts, leave a comment below. Tell me what struck deepest. A name, a parallel, a prayer, unprayed. Share your reflections. Pose the questions that linger. Because these dialogues, these grapplings with shadow, forge the bulwark against recurrence. If you believe voices like theirs deserve hearing, subscribe. Not for spectacle, but for every ossuary still sealed, every archive unrifled, every echo meant to fade but resounding, for the silences that demand breaking.